Whilst over the years we've seen NHS models move from centralisation to localisation and then back again, this latest reform is the first time that we've seen a significant move to integrate social care. Now, this has been further strengthened through the 2022 Health and Social Care Act, which introduced new legislative measures that aim to make it easier for health and care organisations to deliver joined-up care across the NHS. The thought leaders I interviewed explained differences in the time frame that they've been operating as an ICS, and one area applied for ICS status over 5 years ago due to their struggling health economy under these CCG structures and the anticipated opportunities an ICS would present. Now, others, however, explain how their ICS was newly formed when they became statutory bodies last year, and that it's still very much early days for them, with activity focusing on practical changes such as setting up hierarchies and appointing people into roles to lead initiatives within the subcommittees.
A lot of it's just really practical hierarchy stuff, setting systems up and people, and and they're still going through that phase, sort of appointing people, trying to work out what to do with the 1,000 or so staff that transfer from CCGs. So most of the work from, say, when they became a statutory organisation in July, so it's only 2 or 3 months. Has been around the formalities of setting up hierarchies, boards, subcommittees, appointing people to lead various things.
And I see some of the other boroughs, in a way, really having to open their workbook and say, okay, chapter 1, integration 101, and say, what does this mean? Okay, we need 2 of those and 1 of those and 3 of those. We better find those people.
Although ICSs only became statutory bodies within the last 6 months, the NHS first started talking about its ambitions for integration long before this. And the reality is that they've been developing for several years now. So they evolved from Sustainability and Transformation Partnerships, or STPs, which were groupings of health and care organisations formed in 2016 to develop place-based plans for the future of health and care services in their areas, and were essentially the precursor to the ICS organisations. So from 2016 onwards, we all observed multiple CCG mergers as the initial steps to start consolidation of NHS organisations and to centralise resources in line with the NHS long-term plan. Now, by 2021, each STP or ICS footprint, which were still voluntary partnerships at that stage, involved either a single or a very limited number of CCGs in the run-up to ICSs becoming statutory bodies last year. Now, the reality of the situation is one of gradual transition to the ICS structure, which will come as no surprise to anybody here, I'm sure, as the NHS is not the most dynamic of organisations. This means that there were no significant overnight changes when ICSs became statutory bodies, but legislation has prioritised the changes needed to realise these new NHS organisation structures. Now, each of the 42 ICSs is now underway developing and publishing their 5-year strategic plans to explain how their partners will work together to deliver the ambitions of the NHS long-term plan and address the specific priorities, opportunities and challenges within their ICS area. Now, the pandemic has undoubtedly had an impact on the transition period, having surfaced during a critical time and slowing progress in many areas. However, the impact of COVID has not been all negative, and it has actually driven some change through the way that the NHS uses technology as an organisation. And therefore, it's actually been a catalyst to some of the ambitions of the NHS long-term plan, such as virtual consultations becoming much more widespread. Now, COVID also deflected the focus of the NHS, and some believe this also tempered the transition period. For those thought leaders who have been present during previous restructures, some cynicism remains though, as they've experienced various different policies, which they believe to be a cycle of centralisation followed by decentralisation, spanning back to the days of the PCTs and before.
As we have seen over the last few years, greater centralisation is only a prelude to more localisation. So, I do think the pendulum will swing back in due course. and there will be more borough and local representation. But right now, centralisation is the theme.
We have a tendency to just keep going around in the circle. So things that were popular 10 years ago then become unpopular. And eventually, if you just leave them long enough, then that flares, they will come back in style again.
Yeah. So probably in another 2 years, you'll start hearing the rumblings of the next transition.
NHS organisations have traditionally been highly protective over their budgets, as each organisation is held accountable to achieving their individual annual financial plans. So as a result, they've caused significant barriers to achieving goals as a system, as parties can be unwilling to contribute their full budgets, but still expect an equal say. Now, payers hope for a combined ICS budget that all partner organisations will draw from to achieve their streams of work. But this does raise concerns over accountability. This would certainly help overcome any competitive issues between partner organisations, but the NHS is so entrenched in this way of working that this cultural change is a significant challenge to implement.
They've been talking about is that you just have the one budget.
Yeah.
Because then you haven't got this, well, actually, should be in your budget, or we're not paying for that.
For me, one of the key issues about does an integrated care partnership work is when the acute trust puts its hand in the pocket and says, oh, I can see there are difficulties over here in community services or primary care. Here, have some of this.
Yeah.
And that is still, not happening. And if anything, other parts of the system are being are being starved a little bit in order for the acute trust to get on with it. In a way, 'twas ever thus. But I suppose, leaving aside the financial austerity that we're going into, I think it will take a bit more time for everybody to say, okay, I've got, my budget is 50 million, I'll put that in the table. Your budget is 100 million, you put that in the table. Your budget is 30 million, you put that in the table. Now let's work out how to spend it. I think that is still some way off, although I think in some parts I can see, people beginning to understand that might be a way of beginning to think about the problem.